Welcome to Co-op Radio 102.7 FM CFRO. This is Monday Brown Bagger. My name is Reginald Angus Argue. This will be archived on my website of www.reginaldangusargue.com. Before I introduce our first guest, I just wanted to quickly point out to people that I recently saw a video on MSNBC News. There was a lawyer on there talking about the fact that thanks to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the United States has a toxic debt load of additional $45.5 trillion. And at the same time, also, the lawyer continued on to say that since the early 80s, anyone who bought land or took out a mortgage, that they are now, they don't know who owns the property. So if you bought your land after that date, they don't know if you own the property or not. So it's just amazing with that. But with that said, I want to introduce our first guest. We've had him on in the past. He's coming back on to continue to inform us of very explosive information. He's a retired aero engineer, mineralogist, and he runs a nonprofit foundation. At the same time, he's going to inform us what's going on in regards to the CIA and the China connection and many other things. As I finish saying that, I want to introduce our guest, Stephen C. Davis. Okay, it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulty, so what we're going to do is we're going to throw in a quick CD, and then we'll come back with our guest.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to sin.
Welcome back to Co-op. Okay, it looks like we're having a little bit of difficulty again. Are you there, Steve? Okay, it looks like we're going to take a quick break. We're going to put on a CD.
Shoving taxes down. Bailing out banks we don't even own. It's a ruination. They're invading our privacy.
Welcome back to Co-op Radio. It looks like we're able to correct our technical problems right now. We have Steve Davis on the air right now. Are you there, Steve?
I am. I hear you, but it's a sounding thing. I don't know if you're live with me.
Yeah, we can hear you, Steve.
Okay, good. Sure.
And the first thing I want to talk about is this Richard Jones Trust, which I realize that we've touched briefly, ever so briefly in the past, but you gave me some documents which talked about the Richard Jones Trust, and it also talked about a brief briefing that was given to General Schwarzkopf, and it also mentioned a name in there, the Vice President, Mike Brown, of the First Bank, also known a.k.a. the First National Bank, a.k.a. Zion First National Bank, which tied right in with the Mormon Church. But it talked about this $9,999,099.99 cashier's check that was cashed, and then they had to redeposit it because there was possible high treason for cashing this money because the Richard Jones Trust. I want you to quickly touch on that, a little bit about this, who founded the Richard Jones Trust, and you know what the Richard Jones Trust really is.
They basically knew that the funds were there, and they had to backtrack, and basically they found out that, there's someone who has power signature on the account that they thought they had taken out when they took out.
Steve, I'm going to quickly interrupt you there. It looks like we had a little bit of technical problems in the beginning. It looks like we got a better mic focus on you. I want you to quickly start over. What's the Richard Jones, what you're talking about, if you could?
Sure. The Richard Jones Trust was created back in 1960, and it was set up by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and the power of signature went over to Ezra Taft Benson, who was Secretary of Agriculture back then, and he worked then jointly with Richard Jones as his banker. And basically in 1985, they activated the Jones Trust in a contract that was directly involved with me with Merrill Lynch. So that was my direct involvement, because they used this Jones Trust to purchase all this bulk gold all over the world through my contract with Merrill Lynch, and they used this money in the CIA bank account to do all the banking transactions. And so the direct connection I have with General Schwarzkopf is that, amazingly, years later, he comes to the Brigham Young University and they give him an honorary doctorate degree. And there were a lot of protests because a lot of people know how dishonest Schwarzkopf is with secret deals, especially going with China, which is, of course, the interesting subject that you and I are going to cover today.
Yeah, and it looks like already, Steve, we've already had acts of sabotage done against us because of, the problems with the phone here. I don't think that was technical problems. I'd just like to say for a moment to the person that's doing the acts of sabotage against us, you're not going to stop the voice of the people. The voice of the people will be heard. We will have the right. We will have our day. If not in court, we'll have our day in public opinion, and you will be exposed as a true traitorous coward you truly are. Now, with that said there, Steve, I wanted to quickly, with the Richard Jones Trust, how did this also involve former Ambassador Leo Wanta and also your former attorney, Paul J. Young, at the same time?
Well, Paul Young was working at the White House in 1985. And that's when he was directly, as a returned Mormon missionary, he'd gone down to Nicaragua as a missionary. And amazingly, he had a phenomenal Spanish language ability, and he was chosen through his intelligence by the White House and his ability to learn how to communicate with the people, all during the time of the Nicaraguan Iran-Contra affairs with Oliver North. And so with his ability and directly involved with this Jones Trust at the White House in 1985, basically I hired him as my personal attorney in 1998. And he corroborated all of the information that I had in my own personal archives and directions and activities, and he basically said, hey, Steve is telling the truth about his personal direct involvement with this Jones Trust. So basically they used me as a front, supposedly, in their attitude of having an activity, but the actual company that had the joint venture with us was out of Kentucky, and amazingly how Halliburton acquires that company after this transaction back in 1985.
So all of a sudden we're talking about Dick Cheney and the rest of the people. Before we continue on, I wanted to quickly point out, you passed me an email in the past, and you were also describing this Richard Jones Trust. The reason why it was set up with it, put the National Forest, the Bureau of Land Management, the Indian tribal lands, etc., which was set up to pay off the national debt of the U.S. Now, with that said, you also talked about a Jones Trust, which was set up to buy 300,000 metric tons of gold by the Mormon Church. At any time, did anyone from the Rand Jones Trust in the Zion First National Bank, the First National Bank, or even the First Bank, whatever you want to call it, did they use any of the money from the Richard Jones Trust to buy their gold? Well, yes. The thing that is that I had my great member of my board of directors of Canco Energy, Fred Haydock. Fred Haydock actually had the signed contract with Paul Smith over there in Kentucky that was his company was acquired by Halliburton after this. But like I was saying, I actually flew Fred Haydock over to Switzerland to do the transactions back in September of 1985, and I was down in the Cayman Islands doing the transaction for our portion of the signed contract with Merrill Lynch. Well, here to my amazement, years later, I found out from Fred Haydock that he went over there and spent several weeks, and he trustingly, or whatever you want to call, turned over his personal power of attorney to Zion's First National Bank in Salt Lake City. So here the Jones Trust was actively involving in the 1985-1986 purchase of over 300,000 metric ton of gold, bulk gold all over the world, being sent and controlled by the Mormon Church in Salt Lake City through the granite storage facilities where they hold their genealogy and all records up in the Salt Lake Canyons there. And amazingly, they were using our power of attorney, our contract, our stuff to transfer this to Salt Lake City, where we had under a signed contract with the Iron Mountain in New York, in the state of New York. So we had all the documents and basically got corroborated by Paul J. Young, who was at the White House in 85, but my attorney in 98. Hey, Steve Davis is telling the truth. He's got all this stuff because he was directly involved with Ezra Taft Benson and Richard Jones, who actually did the transactions through the New York Federal Reserve Bank there in New York City. And also, I'd like to quickly point out that because they did that, that is an act, that is a treasonous act against the United States of America in the way that this money was meant to pay off the U.S. debt and belonged to the U.S. citizens only. The last time I checked, the Mormon Church is not the United States of America. And I would like to send a message out right now to the Zion First National Bank, a.k.a. First Bank, whatever you want to call yourself. You are not the American people. You have committed an act of treason against the American people. Now I know why acts of sabotage have been carried out against me. Thank you so much for coming on and pointing that out, Steve. I want you to quickly talk about briefly what they did to set up your attorney, Paul Young, that stripped him of his license to practice law. He's now a legal aid. And right after you've done that, then we'll quickly jump over to the other stuff in regards to Ambassador Huntsman going over to China.
Sure. In 1999, when Paul Young was my official attorney, he wrote several letters to members of the board of directors of Zions First National Bank, namely Gordon B. Hinckley and his law firm of Curtin and McConkie. And these three letters I sent to you, in addition to several other letters that he sent elsewhere, especially to a federal judge and all. And he was pointing out to Zions Bank board member Hinckley and several people that, hey, please understand that Steve Davis has this contract. Steve Davis has negotiated this because of the trust that Ronald Reagan had with Steve Davis back in the 1970s. Ronald Reagan and I were on national radio for some time back during the United States bicentennial era in 1975 and 1976, and he got to trust me. And so here in 1985, President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, sees that, oh my goodness, well, Steve Davis has this contract with Merrill Lynch. And so Paul Young, who worked at the White House in 1985, corroborated this to Gordon B. Hinckley and Curtin and McConkie in 1999. Well, after that, for the past 11 years, they basically caused everything they could to discredit Paul. And he ended up being in federal prison under tightest security as you can imagine for 3.5 years. And finally, he was allowed to give one more opportunity to appear before the federal judge, which was Federal Judge D. Benson. And on June 30th of this year, he basically went to the judge and says, hey, I am sick and tired of you guys playing games with me. I demand the justice to come forward. He reprimanded the judge. He reprimanded the prosecutors, the U.S. attorneys there in Salt Lake City. And to his amazement, Judge Benson says, I never want to see you in this court again, hit the gavel, and he left as a free man. Now, that was June 30th of this year. And so since that date, Paul and I have been working very closely together in bringing forth the true facts of this Richard Jones Trust. Because in actuality, Paul Young was the attorney for Johannes Heike and his wife, who was the widow of Richard Jones. And so that was how closely connected Paul Young was directed in this, and they had to discredit him. But amazingly, what comes up comes around, and he and I are standing up boldly and actually trying to help people understand that there's a long paper trail of this stuff, and we want to protect the people of the United States and the world in getting out of debt. And that was a specific reason, like you said, Reg, that this account was set up back in many, many years ago under Dwight D. Eisenhower to pay off the national debt.